Hey, welcome everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm Jonathan Kirschner, the founder and CEO of AIR Consulting, and I'm joined with Megan Marshall, our Chief Customer Officer at AIR Consulting. Hey, Megan, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Jonathan. Nice to be here and talk with you about this important topic today.
Yeah, we're talking about a really important topic. Really, it comes down to what does excellent coaching look like? And that's an important topic always, but particularly in our current context right now, where there's been a movement towards coaching at scale, even unlimited coaching, which is an incredible idea, by the way. It's an incredible aspiration that everybody should get a coach. But it's important that we consider um, some nuances and consider some of the unintended downside implications to that. So um, I'll kick us off with just my own thoughts on like what constitutes great coaching based on our 15 years of success at AIR Consulting as a premier provider of executive coaching for leaders. And where it starts is, of course, with a great coach. So you want to have an excellent, high quality executive coach. And the first thing we look for at AIR is a coach's background and experiences. So has that coach been in the shoes of a leader? Do they know what it's like to traverse an enterprise, to be in a system that is complex, to have been a manager and be managed? Do they understand that not just conceptually, like you would if you were like an MBA professor, but actually experientially? And so it's very important for us at AIR and in my experience that a coach really has that experiential understanding. And next we look at, all right, how many years of experience do you have as an executive coach? Executive coaching is a form of expertise, and any form of expertise or craft requires muscle memory, training, years of expertise. Some say 10 years is the starting point in which you can even begin to call yourself an expert. So we look for, all right, how many years have you been doing this? And then beyond that, it's the individual's training and their expertise in the science of coaching itself. So you have the business experience and all of the collective experiences of doing many years of coaching, but there's also a formal learning side to this. Like you can't just coach from the hip or from your intuition. Um, there is a science behind this. And so how well does the coach navigate what I think of as like four really important areas: cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and the relationship. So like cognitive is like how well am I able to conceptualize what's going on and relay that and articulate it? How well am I able to help a client make meaning and to strategize? Emotional is like how do I help a client identify their emotions as important signals, process those emotions, accept those emotions. When we don't do that, we end up making decisions that sometimes are influenced, heavily influenced by our emotions, rather than a balance between our mind and our heart, um, our cognition and our emotions. And then, behaviorally, right, I could be a coach that does a great job at conceptualizing things. I've got great ideas. It's very intellectually stimulating. I can even bring a great amount of emotional intelligence to the conversation. But if we don't convert all of that into behavior, then ultimately we're just stuck with great ideas and the feel goods, as I like to say, which is not enough, right? We have to be able to convert that into behavior change. And so there's a degree of expertise that a great coach brings, both in session in terms of practicing, role playing, but also like really getting client to commit to action, and then importantly, learning how to like reinforce those changes over the long term, because behavior change can happen and then revert right back to where it was, right? So behavior is really important. And then lastly, you could do all three of those, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral, really, really well. But if you don't have the trust of the coachee, and you haven't cultivated a climate of trust and strong rapport with your client, then everything's going to fall apart, right? You'll have great ideas, you'll have the feel goods, and maybe the feel goods. You'll have attempts at behavior change, but without that relationship, there's not a container for it all. And so what I've found is not great coaches or mediocre coaches will have 2 or 3 of those 4. Great coaches have all 4 and know how to really like weave them together really, really well. So those are some of the really important features that I think a great coach needs to possess. I'll stop there. I actually have some more ideas, but I wanted to just hear from you, Megan, like any reaction to what I've shared and anything you would add, to this question.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jonathan. I really liked how you talked about how, good coaches can have a few of these things in terms of cognitive, emotional, behavioral, relationship, but that great coaches will have all 4. And I see that so often where it's about that relationship with the coach being one of the best factors in predicting outcomes, successful outcomes from coaching. So it's so important. And so you need coaches that are skilled, that have that experience, have the certification. We really value here at AIIR business acumen, a coach that has sat in the shoes of a leader that they're working with. They're able to bring that wisdom, experience, expertise, and they're leveraging that in terms of really building a relationship, and really gaining the respect of their coachee, so that their coachee is really enabled and motivated in terms of taking action. So love everything you shared, and looking forward to hearing more, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that having a process or a methodology is pretty important. I've seen actually a lot of coaches say, well, I was a senior leader for 20 years in banking, and so I know what they need to do. And those types of engagements tend to be much more on the sort of mentorship or advice side, being very directive. And you go session after session of just essentially giving advice, right? Which is not that is valuable, right? But that doesn't bring somebody on a journey of change. So coaching fundamentally is not just getting information, it's going on this journey of change. And to do that, you need to have a compass and a roadmap. And the way we, think about that net is a process and methodology. So at AIR, we have our methodology, the AIR method: assessment, insight, implementation, reinforcement. And that brings an important degree of structure. Now, you can be overly structured, and that's also not good because you have to meet a client where they're at. But the best coaches know how to bring a degree of structure and balance that with meeting the client where they're at and being very adaptive. So coaching process, really important. From your perspective, Megan, because you've overseen our coaching practice at AIR for years now, anything that you would add, especially when you think about the way we coach at AIR or other firms, other reputable firms that we respect and see do great work, anything that you see distinctive, particularly in terms of like delivering results, not just for the person, but for the organization, anything that you would add to this?
Yeah, I think when we're really talking about this idea of what makes great coaching, we have to talk about coaching being aligned with the organization's strategy and what their definition of success is. They're the ones that are really investing in the leader's growth. And sometimes what I've seen is, if I want to go through coaching and I'm like, oh, what do I want to work on? I want to work on networking. I want to be the best network because I want to move ahead in my career. Maybe I want to jump roles, whatever it might be.
Or
And
like
that's,
work-life balance.
work-life balance, self-care,
That's
I want to be able to take care of myself. Those things are not bad. Those things are good. And they are great personal development goals to work on. But coaching is really about making the leader and their organization better. At AIIR, we want to help leaders navigate change and shape a better future. And so coaching is so critical because we're helping the organization, from thinking about that individual, thinking about the team that they work with, thinking about the organization where they're having an impact. And I love, Jonathan, when you talked about a stage coach and helping them move from where they are now to where they're going. And it's about that journey. But in order for it to be a meaningful journey, you need a destination. And so often that destination, if it's not informed by what the organization is looking for that person to develop, it misses the mark. They end up off course somewhere else. And so maybe I do have a goal in my example that's about networking, but maybe my organization is looking for me to really develop my executive presence. They need me to be showing up differently in meetings, using new influence skill, being able to communicate a vision that others want to follow. And so what we do at AIIR, if we're looking at, let's say, a 6-month executive coaching engagement, we have these formal touch points with stakeholders. And so we would call their stakeholder the leader going through coaching their manager, and let's say typically an HR business partner that's invested in that leader's success. So at these standard touch points, we're hearing from the stakeholders on what are the leader's strengths, what are their opportunities for development, and what does success look like for the coaching and the leaders in the room for that. So you've got, the coach, the leader, their manager, and HR business partner. And in some ways, the coach then actually ends up informally coaching the stakeholders in terms of how do they give feedback? How are they really contributing to the development and the accountability of that leader? Because coaching, in order for it to be effective, it has to be really building a support system around that leader. And we talk at AIIR a lot about reinforcement and how it's not that difficult to change. What's really difficult is to get that change to be sustained over time. You already talked about that, Jonathan, in terms of you make a change and then you go right back to how you were. And so coaching will end, but how through stakeholder involvement can we, again, build that network? So it's about aligning coaching to the organization strategy and their definition of what success looks like, and then building really a network of leadership around that leader in order to support them and hold them accountable. And I think that's so key. One other thing I would mention that we haven't talked about yet is great coaching. It's all about how do you measure the results? How do you really understand the outcomes from coaching? Jonathan, what do we like to say? It's like if you didn't measure it, how do you know it happened? What would you say there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we don't measure it, then did it happen? There's an empirical nature to, I mean, it's the ultimate, sniff test, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're going to pay us a lot of money. You could argue that from just an integrity standpoint, we have a duty to be able to demonstrate here's the results that you achieve. I mean, and it's tricky because behavior change is not always tangible, right?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you could measure and describe my executive presence being more effective, me being more assertive, but can you measurably describe my confidence levels rising? Much harder, right? So there are these sort of interpsychic factors that, or intrapsychic factors, excuse me, that are difficult, intangible. And so being able to establish a strategy for measurement is all the more so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to, we talk about AIR, about you, Jonathan, in terms of really founding it as a business psychology and having, you know, a deep interest and educational background in science. And so that being very core to how AIR started. But what we're really keen on doing is not just looking at, NPS satisfaction scores. We do collect those too, but we're looking at what was learned through coaching, what behavior change took place, and how can we really understand business results. And like you said, it's not easy, but I think at AIR, we really value alignment and having a true partnership. And I think that should always be there with good coaching. So we want to understand and partner with our organizations in terms of what does success look like. And sometimes we often see, retention. Do leaders we work with, are they invested in, do they stay at the organization? Are they promoted? How can we track their performance reviews? How can we really be that partner with an organization in terms of measuring results? So really they're looking at all of the levels of Kirkpatrick, also the Phillips and the ROI model, but it is key that a great coaching provider is able to partner with their main points of contact at the organization to really be able to tell the story about coaching's impact. And if that's not there, then coaching might be good and appreciated by the people that go through it, but you're really not sharing the amazing impact that coaching can have across an organization. And I know, Jonathan, you and I, and we are really passionate about coaching and really believe in its power to, influence and really change the world. That's kind of why we're here. And so how can we be a part of sharing that story and really being able to show that through data and through science? So we could probably talk all day there, but maybe I'll
Well, I mean, we know that, Megan, not just because we're seeing results come in daily with sort of feedback on a coachee's experience, and in some of these business impact surveys that we receive, people are like, this completely changed my life. It was totally game changing for myself and the organization. We know it from that, but we also know it from being coached ourselves, right? We drink our own Kool-Aid, and some of the best decisions I've made as a leader have been a function of a coaching session where I've been able to be open to challenge in a different way, to expand my way of thinking of something, and then subsequently make a decision that brings the company on an entirely different trajectory than had I not had that session. And so it's immensely valuable when done well. I presume that's a good segue into like this topic of what is going on in the coaching industry, and how has coaching quality degraded so significantly over the past 4 or 5 years. And I can say that based on what you're hearing and reading sort of on the street. We also could say that based on just our day-to-day client interactions and customers coming to us saying, look, we thought this was going to be a really good idea to get everybody coaching, or to get a whole, band or two within our organization coached. And interestingly enough, like everybody, like they were really strong NPS, really strong feedback. We moved the needle on wellness and well-being. And we saw an uptick in retention. But, our business has never performed as poorly as it has. And we haven't been able to see any degree of business impact or organizational impact from this massive investment that we made. And so we're looking for something different. I mean, we've had that conversation is happening probably weekly now at AIR. And I don't know, you're as chief customer officer kind of on the front lines even more than myself. I'm just curious if you have any anecdotes or anything you'd want to share on that. I have some ideas
Yeah.
on the macro phenomena.
Yeah, I appreciate you talked about, we're having conversations about once a week, or sometimes feels like more often where organizations are like, hey, we've tried this, in terms of offering coaching across our organization. And there are some benefits in terms of some people utilizing it and finding it helpful, but it's really not making a meaningful impact. We thought in some ways it's almost like we thought we could get a lower cost option benefit for all, but in some ways it's a little bit of like kind of getting what you paid for. And so they're kind of coming back to like, we really need strong leaders in order for our company to move into the future. And so how do we do that? This isn't working. We need to come back to something. And there's a lot of reasons, for that. I think we can talk through, we've talked about the quality of coaches. What we see is that with a lot of kind of coaching for all providers, that oftentimes coaches are getting paid, very little
Right.
for those engagements, 50, 40, it keeps going down. I feel like we keep learning at lower rates. And so if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about great coaches, they're not wanting to work at those rates. They're wanting to get paid more. And so they're leaving and they're going to find places where they can make more, or they're putting people back to back. So Jonathan, we've heard kind of some horror stories in terms of people taking coaching calls and lines at a grocery store.
Shopping, video.
Yeah, whatever. Because if you're a coach, it's like, okay, I need to have these back to back to back to back. That's really going to impact the quality. You could even have it be a good coach, but
So you're saying like if a coach, obviously this is if you're dedicating yourself to this as your profession, then you need to put bread on the table. And
right.
if you're getting paid, I don't know, $50 an hour, let's just use that number, rather than $200 an hour or $300 an hour, or obviously it goes very, very high from there. But $50 an hour is a fraction of $250, $300 an hour. And so in order to sort of offset that, you need to basically compress your schedule and go back to back, which is, I think, in some ways much harder on the coach. But it also, as a coach myself, I need about a half hour of prep for every hour of session, and about 15 to 20 minutes after a session to kind of like write my notes, kind of debrief with myself, and prepare, for the next session, even though it's 3 weeks out, share any like article or insights, a summary to my client. You wouldn't, in theory, have any time to do that if you're just,
No, not at all. You don't have the time to do that. I also think what's interesting, not only talking about the coach, but talking about when when you have, let's say, an app and it's like, okay, you can go here to have unlimited coaching. Inevitably, you're going to have some people that might utilize it a lot. But what we're seeing is that a lot of people aren't taking advantage of it. One thing, with
Oh,
with our coaching that we talk about, thinking about our coaches, we're really kind of making sure, okay, do we have our next session scheduled? I'm following up as a coach. I'm doing that prep, all the things that you talked about. But it's like you kind of, when you in some ways, I almost feel like if you're one of these providers, you need the utilization rate to be enough that it kind of looks good enough, but you almost don't want it to be utilized too much. And if it's entirely self-run, so it's like, if I want it, I want it. If I don't, I don't. It's just a benefit for all. That's not actually, what is that actually even achieving? If you're thinking about why the organization is making this a benefit that's available to their people. And so it's not just, impact of poor coaching. Is the coaching actually having an impact? And then, I spent some time talking about that organizational alignment. That's not there. So you're not getting the feedback. So again, if I want to work on becoming a better writer, or, whatever it might be, or pottery. I mean, it could be anything. The coach is going to work with you on that.
Right.
And again, that's not really tied to organizational results and alignment, which is so key in order to see meaningful coaching outcomes.
Well, I think that's the trickiest part of it all, is that if I'm a buyer, um, and I am asked, do you want to provide coaching for just a few people or for everybody in your organization and democratize it? The obvious path would be towards democratization. Um, and I'd want to get everybody this benefit, right? Um, and then if I said, well, tell me how how do I know it'll work? And I'm shown these metrics like, increased well-being and engagement, and retention, then I might really be ready to pull out, my pocketbook, or swipe my card on that, because now there's evidence that supports this thesis for getting coaching for everyone. But I guess what I'm hearing you say is that, like, on some level, even though those metrics, those results, those aggregate data results are painting a positive picture, it's not necessarily pointing to something that has benefited the organization or the business per se. It's because it's not necessarily aligned to the organizational strategy. I mean, I guess if the organizational strategy was we need to increase retention by 3 points, and by making people feel happy and engaged, and having a sounding board to talk to increases retention, but then presumably that is a good thing.
Yes, I mean, I think so, if that works, or I'm not sure. I
I
think it's
think
a
the problem is that people aren't asking coaching, you know, for what? Like, what's my end game
yeah,
with this?
yeah.
I think that if we were a bit more precise in, um and clear about, like, why are we making this investment,
Mm,
then I think in some cases coaching for all is a good idea. And in other cases, it's absolutely the completely wrong thing to do. And that investment should be concentrated in your leadership because you're looking to bolster leadership.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing we haven't talked about is I think something that's attractive is automation. So it's like, oh, well, we could not have as many people kind of watching over coaching or be as involved. Like everybody can just go to an app and, it kind of
Magically, all happen.
magical. And I do think there's plenty of things. I mean, we're big fans here at AIR of AI and leveraging it to be faster, more efficient, and really gain everything we can from it. I think we're all about that. But I think again, that's taking away from what I think is so critical, which is that organizational involvement. If you don't have that piece in terms of like, we want to understand what feedback has this leader received? Like, where are they going? Like, where do you want them to go? Again, coaching for what? And again, if you cannot answer that question, then it's a nice to have. But I just think there's something missing in terms of the impact that an organization can really experience and benefit from through coaching. Um, that being said, I understand it's an investment. And so I think, something to think about is what are alternatives? What are things that can be done when, the budget's not as high, but you want to really focus on leader development. So, a few things there to discuss. One is group coaching. We see that
Mhm.
really being a benefit. So you're, bringing together a group of people, which I think has a lot of benefits in terms of, again, connection, peer coaching. But let's say that you've identified as an organization that leaders are really needing help with their, decision quality and decision making. So group coaching can provide a fantastic way to do a little bit of skill building, but really being able to receive coaching as a group in terms of how they're showing up and how they can improve and again move towards that path of being better decision makers as it's defined, by the organization. And at AIR, we have our leadership framework where we're really looking at leadership in terms of leading self, leading others, and leading the organization. So what we do a lot is working with organizations in terms of understanding what are the specific skills where they're looking to see leaders develop. And so how can we use group coaching in order to bolster effectiveness in specific areas that are tailored for that organization? Jonathan, anything else there? I know we talk a lot about group coaching. Anything else you'd want to share there about it?
I think group coaching is I've seen a lot of people say, look, we can't afford one-to-one coaching for all these people. And so we're going to, sort of get group coaching as a next best option. And one-to-one coaching is extremely powerful, but I wouldn't think of this as a next best option, or we can't afford this, therefore that. Group coaching can be extremely powerful and in some ways complementary to one-to-one executive coaching. There's a piece in group coaching around like the social learning. So it's one thing if I'm with my coach and I'm in a state of vulnerability, I'm exploring, I have an insight, and then I commit to action. I have my coach to hold me accountable. That's great. I'm going to meet with my coach again in 3 weeks, and then another 3 weeks, another 3 weeks. We'll have a midpoint check-in with my stakeholder. We'll have another 3 sessions, 4 sessions, and we'll be done. But when I'm with my peers and I'm making myself vulnerable, I'm exploring, and I hear not just from one person, but 8 other people that I work with in my system, sharing insights and support and even challenge, that is an extremely powerful way to both learn and also feel a different level of accountability. And so I think group coaching, I'm a huge fan. I think it's an excellent approach. There's certain things that you just can't get in group coaching that you can get from one-to-one coaching, particularly around like, strategic thinking and, particularly for like, C-level and one down leaders. It's really valuable to have that one-to-one time. But for any people manager, whether it's a new manager to C-suite, group coaching can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, I like how you talk, Jonathan, about kind of bolstering, one-to-one coaching experience or even like a leadership development program. So we do a lot, with like let's say a high potential program where they are doing formal learning. Maybe they have some one-to-one coaching sessions, but the group coaching sessions can be so powerful in terms of bringing their insights and learnings from coaching and sharing them with others. Again, that's that group learning and accountability that you talked about, and really application, because I think the more that everything can build upon each other in providing that integrated experience, the more likely we are to see greater outcomes, because it's really becoming, it's not just something that they're learning in a, workshop and then they leave and they forget all about it. They're having through coaching to understand, okay, what does that look like for me specifically? And they're also working that out in a group. So again, I think that's just a fantastic way to reinforce behavior change. We
That, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I would just share that, there's another, in addition to group coaching, another way to address this is by turning everybody into a coach, right? So I'm not saying this isn't coach with a capital C. This is sort of lowercase c. And by the way, great managers are great coaches to their people. So how can, by distilling some of the foundational coaching skills and strategies among our managers, we're making them better managers, and they are bringing coaching to their people. So you don't necessarily have to go and get coaching for everyone.
Right.
Just empower your managers to do what they should be doing, right? And that's really the best coaching cultures I've seen are organizations that aren't saying, hey, we're going to we're going to bring a coaching culture by getting like a million bazillion coaches in our organization. That's not how. The best coaching cultures have figured out, how do we cultivate this skill set within our people so that they are coaching, developing, supporting, and challenging each other to always continuously improve and become higher and higher performing. Those are the best coaching cultures I've seen. You still need, at a certain point, the capital C coaching, because there's certain things like when you're, when you're managing 30,000 people or a $2 billion P&L, and you have to make strategic decisions, and the pressure of the world is sitting on your shoulders. That's a really appropriate time to bring in an expert, right? To help you soundboard, think through, scenario plan, make sure that your emotions are not leading the decisions. That's a really good time to invest in capital C executive coaching. But as far as the rest of the organization getting coaching, leader as coach or manager as coach training is a really strong strategy.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, skill development. So we, with our kind of our coaching leader solutions, so we're leveraging kind of skill building there in terms of how do you teach those coaching skills and strategy. So we also have our coaching mindset index, which I love because it's really about how does a manager or a leader use coaching skills and strategies in their leadership of others. So we're looking at things like, how do they share feedback? How do they help others set goals? How do they help them find solutions? And what I love about it is that, with the learning and with the assessment, we're not necessarily saying there's a right or wrong way, but it's helping teach them skills and then understand, in the context that you're in, what do you need to be doing more or less of? And I think building those critical thinking skills, I think one-to-one coaching is excellent. But when we think about, hey, we really need, let's say, at a certain level, for our leaders to be upskilled in something specific, leadership development is just a fantastic way to do that, in a way that can be more scalable and upskilling leaders across an organization. And then finally, and this is a topic we're talking about a lot, I would say, and there's probably more about AI. And I think right now, there is such a need for leaders to understand, how do they leverage AI? What does leadership look like? How do they navigate so much change that's happening? How do they build resilience? I know, Jonathan, we have our AI leadership bootcamp, and then also we are working with Dr. Nikki Terblanche, and maybe Jonathan, you can share a bit more about that. But I would really think he's kind of
Absolutely.
the godfather of AI, and really understanding, how can you leverage AI in terms of goal attainment. And so that's just something to think about. Again, it's not necessarily replacing, one-to-one coaches, but I do think that there's a place where leaders can benefit from AI, and organizations can benefit from AI in terms of helping their leaders develop skills. Yeah, Jonathan, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, Nikki is really sort of our AI scholar in residence. His research is at the intersection of AI and coaching, and probably the pioneer. There are a lot of players now in the space, a lot of coaching bots, AI coaching bots. Some are terrible, some are mediocre, and some are amazing, and even as good as human coaches, if not, dare I say, better in some regard. But Nikki actually is one of the only people that has hard empirical evidence of behavior change vis-a-vis AI, an AI coaching assistant. And so it's fascinating for anybody who wants to dig in further. So this is an amazing conversation. I'm getting a lot of energy, particularly around this exploration of like, how can you create a coaching culture without having to get a lot of coaches of varying degrees of quality and expertise to coach many people in the organization without a clear way of knowing whether or not it's having organizational impact. I think again, I want to like affirm what I said earlier, that there are use cases for that. It just very much depends on like, for what? What are we investing for? What are we trying to solve for? And that brings me to sort of one of the final areas I want to make sure we cover today, which is, how do we, what advice, do we bring, can we share with regard to managing some of the pitfalls? So I'm an HR leader. I've been told by my CHRO or by the CEO, like, we need better leaders in this organization. We need people who are, more engaged. We need a stronger culture. Figure it out. Get us coaching, right? So I'm now the HR leader, and I'm Googling coaching. How do I'm calling up friends and colleagues. How do I make the best possible decisions when I go out to construct my coaching strategy? That's one of the questions I have. I'll share just an immediate thought that segues from what we were talking about, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, Megan. My immediate thought is, there has been this sort of infatuation with the notion of scaling. Like, we need to scale coaching. We need coaching for 500 people. We need coaching for like 2,000 people. We need coaching for everybody. Why? Because we need to scale. Okay. Why do you need to scale? Well, because our hair's on fire, and there's urgency, and we're making this huge investment to accelerate something that would have taken 10 years into 2 years. And so we need to scale. And it's like, okay, so is getting everybody a coach the right way to scale, right? So I guess the first piece of advice I'd say is like, stop, pause, breathe, think, right? And then to consider that, getting a whole bunch of people that are of medium to low level quality really brings you into a fallacy of like quantity over quality, right?
Mhm.
And that is a very, very important trade-off. Sometimes quantity over quality actually is the right decision, but oftentimes it's not. And low cost is also, sometimes it's the right decision, but sometimes, and oftentimes, you get what you pay for, and getting a little bit of something great can be better than getting a lot of something just okay, depending on your strategy. And so when it comes to that strategy, I want to just impress upon our viewers that you can concentrate your coaching investment in your top 20 to 50 people that have the highest leverage within the organization. And if you optimize those individuals who have an exponential level of influence on the next levels down, that is actually arguably a far more impactful and effective scaling strategy vis-a-vis cascading than getting everybody a highly variable coach that's working back to back at $50 an hour every 30 minutes. So I want to challenge this idea that of quality over of quantity being prioritized over quality, and also the importance of understanding that there are trade-offs when we choose a low cost solution. And so and if you pass through those and still arrive at, okay, we need to get coaching for everybody, then you've done your due diligence, but you've got to pass through those gates.
Yeah.
Any reaction to that? And also just a curious, like, what would be your advice, as far as avoiding the pitfalls?
I love everything you shared, Jonathan, in terms of, in some ways using critical thinking to really think about, so what are we looking for coaching to accomplish? And really, those 4 steps that, one of them was to breathe, slow down, really think about it, and
Yeah,
evaluate.
important.
It's hard for me, in terms of thinking about things that organizations could do or should be thinking about, or what they need to do to avoid the pitfalls. I come back to organizational alignment. And how do you not have your development? When you think about scale, it's like, well, everybody needs this. Well, let me just outsource it. Let me just get it in an app. Let me just put it somewhere, hit a button. And I don't want to think about it. I have so much to think about. And it's like, that doesn't have to all be on one person internally managing coaching. How do you really get others invested in the success of your leadership development or coaching initiative? I think, we partner a lot with organizations in terms of, if you've really decided who are the people that you want to invest in, training their managers, coaching their managers, having those formal stakeholder meetings. How are they invested in a part of it? So it's not just about that one person going through coaching or whatever it might be. It's really about, what can you do to foster that cascade or that ripple effect, in order to really be able to get to that so what, when you've determined what are your goals for coaching. So I just, again, think over and over again, organizational alignment leads to better outcomes. And so really being focused there.
Fantastic. I love it, Meg. I know we're getting close to time. Maybe we take a moment just to share any final thoughts, or reflections. I can kick us off if you want. The final thought I have is just really about what are we solving for? What we're solving for at AIIR is leadership and leadership effectiveness. And of course, in our current zeitgeist, today, everybody wants to be a leader, thinks of themselves as a leader, nurturing their inner leader, and that's awesome. And I do believe that anybody can be a leader, right? Leadership is not some innate gift that you're born with. It's something that you can develop. It's a set of skills and attributes and a disposition. But it's really hard. And it's nice, and there's like sort of a romanticized idea of thinking of yourself as a leader, which gives you the feel goods. But real leadership is super hard and is full of uncertainty and failure and successes. But it is very complex, arduous, takes a huge mental, emotional toll. And because of that, if you're looking to elevate leadership and to develop great leaders, because you see that as a lever for positive change, for greater results within your organization, you do not want to miss by underinvesting or getting the wrong type of coach for your leaders. That is, you want to do the opposite. If anything, you want to overpay. And I hate saying that. I mean, I feel gross saying that, but that's how important it is, to ensure that we have the best possible leadership in our organizations. Because there's probably not a single variable more correlated to long-term sustainable outperformance than leadership, period. That's my final parting thought. Megan, how about you? Anything that you would leave our audience with?
Yeah, I think, Jonathan, I'll build off of that in terms of the importance of leadership. There's a great quote I was reading the other day. I've got it here from Peter Drucker that says, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. And I think that's so true. And, we have our definition here that leadership is the act of realizing a clear and compelling vision through others. And again, just underscoring the importance of leadership and its power to change organizations for the better. And so again, it's so important to invest in developing leaders. And we really believe that coaching is one of the best ways to do that in leadership development. And so it's been wonderful having this conversation and talking through what makes great coaching. And this has been fun, Jonathan. Thank you.
Yeah, Megan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and engagement. And we'll look forward to another talk coming soon. Bye for now.